It was one of those rare moments when the world seemed perfectly still, quiet, peaceful. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the neighborhood. Birds chirped in the trees, the smell of fresh grass lingered in the air, and all seemed right with the world. That was, until I glanced at my water bill. I'd never been one to scrutinize the bills that came through the door. Water, electricity, gas. They were just things that had to be paid, the same way rent had to be paid. But this time, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. The number on the bill was far higher than it should have been. Twice as much, maybe even more. It didn't make sense. I lived alone, rarely used the sprinklers, and hadn't even used the washing machine that much in the past month. What could have caused the spike? My first thought was that something had gone wrong with the plumbing. Maybe a leak I hadn't noticed. So with a sigh, I grabbed a flashlight and headed out to check the meter. The evening was cool, a slight breeze rustling the leaves of the trees lining the street. My house was the last one on the block, with a tall fence that separated my yard from Karen's, my neighbor's house. Karen, the one who always had something to say about how the neighborhood should be run, the one who believed rules didn't apply to her. I'd never had any serious issues with her, at least not until now. I reached the water meter, crouching down to inspect it closely. At first glance, everything seemed normal, until I noticed a slight, steady whirring sound. My heart skipped a beat. There was no way that noise could be coming from the meter. That wasn't normal. It sounded more like water running. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the meter to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Sure enough, the needle was moving, and not just by a little. It was spinning, slowly but steadily. Someone was using water, and it wasn't me. My stomach churned. I knew exactly what this meant. Without thinking, I stood up and turned to look at Karen's yard. The first thing I noticed was the small irrigation system she had set up on her lawn. She'd been tinkering with it for days, and I'd thought little of it. Until now. The faint sound of running water seemed to be coming from her direction. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. Karen had tapped into my water supply. I felt a rush of anger, but it wasn't just anger. It was a cold, sharp realization that I'd been taken advantage of. I could feel my pulse quicken as I stormed toward the wooden fence, ready to confront her. But as I got closer to the property line, I hesitated. I wanted to burst through her back gate and scream at her, but I knew that wouldn't help. Karen had a way of twisting everything, making me feel like I was the one in the wrong. She'd done it before. So I stood there, watching her carefully, trying to think of a way to handle this that wouldn't end in a shouting match. Through the gaps in the fence, I saw her, standing on her porch, smiling that smug, fake smile of hers. She saw me looking and waved. I took a deep breath. Time to confront her. I marched to the front door, knocked hard, and waited. Moments later, Karen opened it, her wide grin still plastered on her face. "Well, look who's here. What's up?" she said with that syrupy sweetness she used to pretend to be friendly. "Don't act like you don't know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been siphoning water off my line, haven't you?" Her face immediately faltered, but only for a second. She recovered quickly, her expression shifting to one of feigned innocence. "Siphoning water? What are you talking about?" she asked, putting her hand to her chest, as if genuinely surprised. "Don't play dumb, Karen. I've seen the irrigation system you installed, and I know what you've done." I pointed toward the yard, my finger shaking with the fury that was building up inside me. She glanced over her shoulder, as if considering whether she should deny it further. But then, after a long pause, she sighed dramatically, as if she had no choice but to admit it. Okay, she said, rolling her eyes. "I've been using your water, but it's just a little bit. It's not like it's making any difference to you." My blood boiled. "A little bit?" I repeated, my voice rising. "A little bit adds up, Karen. That's my money you're wasting." She shrugged, clearly unconcerned. "You're hardly using it anyway. I thought you wouldn't mind. Your lawn's pretty well taken care of, so I thought I could just tap in for a while." I gritted my teeth. "This is illegal, Karen. You can't just take what's not yours." But she wasn't listening. She was already walking back into her house, as if dismissing the entire situation. But the worst part was that I couldn't even get her to understand. She was so entitled, so sure that the rules didn't apply to her. My hand clenched into a fist, and as she disappeared into her house, a thought formed in my mind, one that made my blood run cold, and then, almost immediately, gave me a surge of excitement. If she thought she could take what wasn't hers without consequences, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The more I thought about it, the more my anger simmered. I couldn't believe Karen had crossed that line, literally and figuratively, stealing from me without a second thought. It wasn't just the money. It was the sheer audacity of her actions. I couldn't let this slide, not without doing something about it. She had taken advantage of my kindness, assuming that because I'd never caused a scene, I'd just let it go. But this was different. This was a betrayal. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the idea began to form in my mind. Clear, simple, but daring. I would make Karen understand exactly what it felt like to have something taken from you without permission, and I would make sure she would never forget the lesson. I had a few tools in the garage, nothing fancy, but enough to get the job done. I was no expert in plumbing, but I had fixed a few things in the past. So when the idea came to me, I didn't hesitate. I could rewire her irrigation system. Just a little twist here, a quick connection there. It wouldn't be hard to reroute the water she was siphoning. Instead of water, though, I would send something else through the pipes, something that would turn her precious lawn into a nightmare. The idea of a tie-dye disaster on her pristine garden was too good to pass up. I smiled to myself as I imagined Karen's shock when she saw what had happened. The grass would be streaked in bright colors, vivid purples, fiery reds, and neon yellows. It would look like someone had taken a rainbow and splattered it all over her precious lawn. She'd never be able to fix it, not without completely tearing up the grass and starting from scratch. The next day, as I sat at my kitchen table, I made a plan. I had to be careful. If she caught me in the act, I knew Karen would go straight to the authorities, that claiming I was vandalizing her property. But if I could pull this off in secret, she would be left with no way to explain it. After all, she had no legal right to the water in the first place. I waited until the sun dipped below the horizon, when the shadows in the neighborhood grew long and the streets grew quieter. The perfect time for some late-night repairs. My heart raced with anticipation as I grabbed my toolbox from the garage and made my way outside. The fence separating our properties was low enough that I could easily climb over. I could feel the cool night air against my skin as I crept along the side of the yard, making my way to the irrigation system. The soft crunch of grass beneath my feet was the only sound, and it seemed almost deafening in the silence of the night. I had studied the irrigation line enough to know exactly where it connected to my water meter. It was hidden in the bushes, out of sight from the house. Quietly, I knelt down and got to work, my hands shaking with the rush of excitement and a little bit of fear. Would I be caught? Would someone see me? I took the necessary parts out of my toolbox, a small plastic reservoir and some tubing I had repurposed from an old garden project. I had mixed the dyes earlier that afternoon, carefully choosing colors that would stain her lawn beyond repair. Purple, pink, yellow, the brightest colors I could find. They were potent, industrial dyes, and I knew they would do their job well. As I connected the tubing to her irrigation system, I felt a surge of power. Karen had thought she could get away with taking what didn't belong to her, but now the tables were turning. The sounds of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the trees filled my ears, but my focus remained sharp. I connected the final piece. Now all I had to do was wait. I pushed a lever on the hose, and the dyes began to flow, slowly at first, but soon enough, the colors began to pour through the pipes. The brilliant streaks of pink, purple, and yellow snaked their way into her system. I stood there, watching with satisfaction, as the first few bursts of color splashed into the grass. It was working. It wasn't until I saw the colors start to streak across the lawn, spreading like a wave of vibrant chaos, that I felt the first pang of nervousness. What if something went wrong? What if Karen noticed too soon? My heart pounded, and I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see her standing on her porch, watching me with that same smug look on her face. But the house was dark. The streetlights flickered quietly, casting long shadows over her now ruined lawn. I couldn't stop myself from grinning. This would be a mess she wouldn't easily fix, no matter how much money she threw at it. The dye was potent, too strong to just wash away with a few sprays of water. It would take weeks, maybe months, to fully fade. If it ever did. As the last of the dye emptied into her system, I quickly detached the tubing and packed up my tools. My heart was still racing, but the excitement was quickly turning into a sense of satisfaction. I had done it. Karen would wake up to the sight of her beautiful, perfectly manicured lawn transformed into a kaleidoscope of colors. She'd have no idea what hit her. I climbed back over the fence, trying to be as quiet as possible, though I wasn't sure it mattered. The deed was done. I stood in my yard for a moment, breathing in the night air, the rush of adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The plan had worked, and there was no going back now. The suspense of it all gripped me. What would Karen do when she saw it? How would she react? I couldn't wait to find out. I walked back into my house, feeling a strange sense of calm. I had taken control, and now I would watch her suffer the consequences of her own actions. The next morning, I woke up to a sky painted in soft shades of blue and pink, a stark contrast to the chaos I knew would unfold just a few houses down. As I sipped my coffee, I tried to keep my mind focused on anything else, but I couldn't shake the thought of Karen's lawn. The image of those bright, vibrant streaks of dye splashed across her precious garden kept flashing in my mind, like a secret I could hardly wait to see her discover. But as the minutes ticked by, a strange feeling settled in my stomach. Something wasn't right. Was it really too late to undo what I'd done? I pushed the thought aside. There was no going back now. The dye was already working its magic, spreading across her perfectly manicured lawn like a wildfire. I forced myself to get ready, moving around my house with mechanical efficiency. But I couldn't escape the growing tension in my chest. I found myself checking the clock more than I should have. It was only a matter of time before Karen noticed the mess. But when would that be? I had to admit, I was starting to get anxious. Karen had a way of making even the smallest problems seem like catastrophes. She was the type of person who would call the cops over a parking dispute, who would march into City Hall demanding to speak to the mayor over something trivial. What if she freaked out? What if she reported me for vandalism? I knew I was in the right. She had no permission to use my water. But I couldn't help but wonder what lengths she would go to in order to make me pay for this. Just as I was about to head out to the grocery store, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a message from a friend, one of my neighbors, someone I had spoken to casually over the fence a few times. "Hey, is everything okay next door? We just saw Karen in her yard, flipping out." I froze, the phone slipping from my hand as a sudden chill ran down my spine. I quickly grabbed it again and opened the message. "She's out there yelling at her sprinklers and running around in a panic. Is something wrong with the water? The lawn looks like it's painted?" My pulse raced. I knew that panic in Karen's voice all too well, the tone that suggested the world was falling apart around her. The message from my neighbor confirmed what I had feared. It had worked. Too well. I couldn't stop the small thrill that ran through me. But at the same time, I knew I had to be careful. This wasn't over. Karen wasn't just going to shrug it off. She was going to come after me. And she wasn't going to stop until she had someone to blame. I grabbed my keys and rushed out of the door, my mind racing. What if Karen was already coming over to confront me? What if she had already told the entire neighborhood what had happened? I tried to shake off the thought. No one had seen me. No one knew what I had done. I was safe. As I walked down the street, I could see Karen from a distance, her hands on her hips, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at the tie-dye nightmare that was once her lawn. She was pacing back and forth, muttering angrily under her breath. I couldn't help myself. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. It was exactly what I had imagined. A perfect disaster. But then something unexpected happened. Karen stopped. She turned slowly, and I could see her eyes flicker toward the street, toward the row of houses, as if she was taking in her surroundings. Something about her body language shifted. She wasn't just angry anymore. She was calculating. My heart skipped a beat. Was she thinking about what to do next? Had she figured out who was responsible? I tried to walk casually, pretending I wasn't watching her, but every part of me was alert, every nerve in my body on edge. Then, without warning, she stormed toward her front door. The unmistakable slam of a door echoed through the neighborhood. I froze, unsure of what was coming next. A part of me expected her to come charging over, yelling for me to fix this, but the other part of me wondered, did she know I was involved? Did she already have a plan to make me pay for what I had done? I looked back toward her house, waiting for the next move, but all I could do was stand there, my heart pounding in my chest. The tension in the air felt almost palpable as I walked down the street, my eyes involuntarily darting toward Karen's yard. It was early in the morning, and I knew she was probably already out there, either trying to salvage what was left of her lawn or losing her mind over the mess I'd left behind. I tried to keep my movements casual, though my heart was thudding in my chest. My mind raced with the possibilities of how she might react. Would she confront me immediately? Would she go straight to the authorities? Or worse, what if she had already figured out I was the one behind it? As I approached my driveway, I glanced across the street, half expecting to see a swarm of neighbors gathering to gawk at Karen's disaster. But it was eerily quiet. The whole block seemed still, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to break the silence. I reached the gate of my yard and hesitated. My eyes flicked back to Karen's house. There she was, standing on her porch, arms crossed, her face a mix of confusion and rage. She was staring at her lawn, the vibrant streaks of pink, purple, and yellow cutting across the grass like a grotesque work of art. I could feel her fury from here. It was so palpable that I almost didn't want to move, afraid that if I did, she would turn and see me standing there, as if I were somehow caught in the act. Then, something shifted. Karen's expression changed. She stood still for a long moment, staring at the disaster, and then, without warning, she marched toward the street, her pace fast and purposeful. My breath caught. Was she coming this way? Was she coming to confront me? I tried to act normal, casually bending down to fiddle with the hose by the garden, all while watching her every move from the corner of my eye. But as Karen reached the curb, she stopped. Her eyes scanned the neighborhood, sweeping over the houses. It was as if she were gathering herself, trying to make sense of the situation. I froze. Something didn't sit right. She wasn't just angry, she was plotting. The way she was standing, the subtle tilt of her head, it was as if she were calculating her next move. And that's when it hit me. She knew. Somehow, she had figured it out. Without a word, Karen turned abruptly and disappeared inside her house. The door slammed behind her with such force that the sound echoed down the street. I stood there, my body tense, the blood rushing to my ears. What was she going to do now? The game had shifted. I had no idea what kind of storm I was about to walk into.